Hey, welcome to Featured Guest Roundtable with Baxter Hankin of Place Initiative, placeinitiative.org, a policy platform operating at the intersection between climate change, social justice, transit-oriented development, and walkable urbanism. Thank you for being here, Baxter. We spoke earlier this year and recorded a short clip, and I'm really happy to have you here again and bring your work to this network. The work you do is so critical and interesting, and I'm going to just turn it over to you for your presentation and follow up with a Q&A after that.
Thanks for having me here today and for the introduction. Thanks everyone for showing up to the presentation. I'm going to share my screen here and get started. So can everyone see the presentation? Great. I'm Baxter Hankin. I'm the project manager at the Climate Receiver Places project. I'm based in New York City, and this project is currently focused on the United States, but it's very applicable to other places around the world, and hopefully with some success we can expand it beyond the US. So within Place Initiative, we have the Climate Receiver Places project, which I manage, and as was said already, Place Initiative is a policy platform that operates in the intersection between climate change, social justice, and urbanism. And sort of in terms of the Climate Receiver Places project, you might ask, what is a climate receiver place? These are communities with lower climate-related risk, well situated to receive climate migrants in terms of geography and urban form. And it's important that we look at walkable, pedestrian-oriented, and transit-oriented urbanism in combination with issues of climate change for two major reasons. One of these major reasons is carbon emissions and land use reduction. Both of these can help reduce climate change, help reduce negative impacts on the environment, and these are part of walkable transit-oriented urbanism due to the reduced carbon emissions by building less, by building more compact, less transportation energy required, and more compact footprints leading to less encroachment into natural lands and farmlands. The other half of why we're looking at climate change in combination with walkable transit-oriented urbanism is due to the ability of places of different development patterns to adapt to an uncertain future with many challenges. Places that are compact, walkable, transit-oriented more efficiently use their resources, they have lower financial burdens, and because of this, they're more able to adapt to a future where there will be many challenges and where they will need to conserve their resources in order to continue to thrive and survive. An example of that is this map that we grabbed from our friends over at Urban3, which is a firm that looks at data of cities and mapping. And essentially, this map here shows that when you average together the amount of property taxes per acre produced by various development patterns within a city, and you combine that with the amounts of city resources and expenditures required by those different development patterns, you find that the denser, more walkable areas of the city, shown here in green, are really financially productive. They're providing the city with resources and funding to be able to continue to provide important resources and serve its residents, while the areas in red are a drain on the tax base and are reducing the city's ability to adapt to the future, as well as respond and plan for disasters related to climate change and other factors beyond climate change as well. So the key questions of our project: as the world changes and becomes less hospitable, where will people go? How will receiving places manage the growth? How will places provide the necessary jobs and services? And how will well-situated places remain viable and resilient? We look at this these questions and this challenge with hope and optimism. We're not looking at the future of climate change and saying that this is a bleak future. We're looking at the future of climate change and seeing there's lots of opportunity and hope to be able to adapt places for the future and give people somewhere to go when they're being uprooted from climate change, and really make sure that places can thrive and grow and continue to prosper into the future. The project's backstory begins with my undergraduate studies at Syracuse University in Syracuse, New York. Syracuse University is situated in a city that has a walkable, compact urban core that has been disinvested over the past many decades, maybe as much as 50 to 70 years now. And on the fringes of the Syracuse area, which has remained very stagnant in population, as the core of the city, as most of the core of the city has emptied out over time, suburbs on the edge of the city have begun to expand and sprawl into farmland and natural lands, destroying the region's financial productivity, its agricultural productivity, and its natural environment. So as I saw this happening in Syracuse, a place that is really not growing in terms of population at all right now, I imagined what would happen to places like this, which are situated across America, across the world really, when these long stagnant places or slow growing places experience a jump in growth and in migration due to climate change. These places don't have the land use regulations or other planning measures and policy and foresight really to really be ready for this change. And when growth happens, the places won't be able to adapt their regulations quickly enough. And you'll see a lot more of this sprawl, destroying the place's chance at a more prosperous and resilient future. So from this, I created the Climate Receiver Places project to address the situations of places like this, as well as a variety of other issues that come with in-migration to places safer from the worst effects of climate change. The project is to bring new life and opportunity to legacy places and other places as well. And by legacy places, what we mean are places that have a lot of capacity and once held a lot of people, but have sort of stagnated, lost a lot of population, and there's a lot of ability, if there's just the right kind of infill development, for these places to receive climate migrants and refugees. We also created this project and continue it for the opportunity and safe havens for extant and incoming residents. We want climate migrants to have somewhere to go, but we also want to make sure the people who are already there have opportunity and can benefit from this migration as well, and that they don't get uprooted from their neighborhoods. And this project is also for really creating sustainability and measurable tools to ensure great places for all. We create change through resilience and sustainability, incorporating diverse perspectives in all community members, which is really important because you can't have a successful climate receiver place without addressing equity. And additionally, we create this change through building coalitions, advocacy, education, and partnerships. And we've already begun to build coalitions in our first few cities that the project is working with. The strategy of the project isn't radical. It's aggregating and reframing existing ideas. What we're essentially doing is bringing together the already existing ideas of resilience and quality, walkable and transit-oriented urbanism, and reframing them in a way that gives places that are potential climate receiver places an additional sense of urgency to once and for all make the big push to actually enact the change that is so desperately needed. We're using the term climate receiver place. At least in the US, a lot of the conversation about places on the receiving end of climate migration has called these places receiver cities, and we want to emphasize that there's also a lot of receiver places that are small towns as well. Receiver places come in all shapes and sizes, and we don't want to just look at the biggest cities when we're planning for the future. The goals of the project include creating a toolkit for better local and regional governance, and then helping communities implement the toolkit in our guiding principles. Our audience includes both local and regional governments, stakeholders, and organizers in and around climate receiver places. And I emphasize local and regional because a climate receiver place is not successful if it only focuses within municipal boundaries. It also needs to look at the region to avoid sprawl beyond the city limits. The project includes 5 main documents, at least so far, that we're looking to create, and some of which that we've already created. It starts with the Receiving Geography Guide, which identifies methodology for determining where are the potential climate receiver places, and then identifies a list of those places, which is continually growing and updating. The Community Principles Guide is next, which provides a guideline for better local and municipal and regional governance for climate receiver places. And then the next 3 documents are all in the works. The Implementation Guide will give a guide to communities for how to move forward, take next steps, and follow through on this project. The Community Metrics Guide will give a way for communities to both qualitatively and quantitatively assess their current situations, link that back to the principles in the Community Principles Guide to understand where change is most needed. And then after the project, to do a post-assessment to understand how well has the community implemented the project, and where can the community continue to improve into the future. And then the final document that we're looking to create is the Receiver Places Toolkit, which will be a database of case studies, recommended policies, and other resources that link back to the principles in the Community Principles Guide as another resource for communities to find the solutions for a resilient future. These are the first 2 documents we've created: Receiving Geography Guide and Community Principles Guide. We have already released the 2nd edition of the 2nd document here based on comments, and we're soon, within the next couple of months, going to be coming out with a new edition of both of these, continually updating and revising based on our conversations with lots of people and some of the communities that we're working with. Between these 2 documents so far, we have 114 pages of content, lots for communities to begin to assess and plan for the future, and really dive into to understand what makes a better climate receiver place. So to dive into those 2 documents a little bit, the Receiving Geography Guide is a supporting document of the project. It looks at the places most viable in a world of climate change, and I want to note that our data is imperfect and incomplete, and that secondary and intermediate receiver places also exist. We shouldn't discount those, and we're just trying to look at the narrow scope within our project of the final and best climate receiver places. And by secondary and intermediate receiver places, what I mean is secondary receiver places would be places that can adapt to a future of climate change and can thrive, but it's a little bit more difficult. And intermediate receiver places would be places that temporarily are a good place for people to go, but ultimately, as climate change continues to worsen, will no longer become ideal places, and people will then move out of those to more final destinations in climate migration. We began this document with looking at the lower 48 states, the US, at the county level, and used data from multiple sources to determine climate risk scores of various counties. Lower is better on a scale from 0 to 14. And from this map, we sort of weighed different risks: water stress, sea level rise, wildfires, heat, wet bulb temperatures, farm yields, extreme rainfall and flooding, hurricanes, and economic damages. And then from there, we narrowed down that geography to places that had a county risk score of 1 to 3 out of 14. And from there, we zoomed into these counties and looked at 2 local criteria that weren't captured on the county level. First is urban form. We want to look at places that are somewhat walkable and urban and have gridded street networks that may be already resilient walkable places, but also might just have the infrastructure that enables them to adapt easily to become that sort of place. So for example, here we included Washington, Pennsylvania as a climate receiver place, but we did not include nearby Cranberry Township because of the lack of walkable urban infrastructure with potential to adapt. So the second local criteria we looked at was local urban flooding. And we used various flood maps to determine how at risk were the walkable cores of various cities and towns across the country, and then using these factors to narrow down from the county level results. We compiled this list of over 600 potential climate receiver places. We are continuing to update this list and also update the list of counties that are qualifying. So far, we're now past 1,300 potential receiver places in the country, ranging from places as small as a few dozen people to as large as almost 1 million. And then we jump into the Community Principles Guide. This is the second guide of the Climate Receiver Places project. It's the main focus of the project. And this is broken down into 3 sections: goals, principles, and next steps. The goals are very broad, overarching, and really set the stage. We want communities to be capable, that is, have capacity to receive climate migrants and refugees, and capacity for existing residents all in an equitable way. We want communities to be resilient, and that's resilient for all, resilient in general, and resilient to climate change specifically. We want communities to be thriving, and that means the communities are thriving in all parts and for everyone, not just the wealthy. We want communities to be urbanist. We want them to be walkable, transit-oriented, compact, financially resilient. We want communities to be specific. That means in terms of communities' approach to the Climate Receiver Places project, it should be steeped in the local community's context. We don't want to apply the same approach to every community. Every community is different. Every community has a different situation, both in terms of climate change and other factors. And then we want communities that are climate receiver places to be exemplary, to set an example for other communities across the country, across the world, about how to plan for a future of climate change very proactively and make it work for everyone. The next section of the Community Principles Guide is the Principles section, which gets a little bit more in detail. We have 9 principles, and each of these principles is broken down into a variety of very specific issues and solutions that communities should consider when planning for a future of climate migration. These principles include equity, affordability, and access, regional focus and partnerships, resilient infrastructure, good governance, high quality built form, connected communities, resilient economies, environmental sustainability, and hazard risk reduction of climate risk factors, particularly the local risk factors that a place has versus the ones it doesn't have and are more prevalent in other places. So Here's an example of what some of the pages, typical pages of the principles section of the Community Principles Guide might look like. You'll have the principal high quality built form broken down into sections such as public space, and within public space, you might have certain subpoints such as quality of space broken down into further subpoints such as quality of public space includes looking at vibrancy, that quality of space is resilient, has variety, is social, safe, comfortable, healthy, hierarchical, equitable, is well maintained, and is environmentally responsible. And then we break down a variety of other points throughout our 90-something page document to really give communities a very overarching and very complete set of a lot of the issues they should be considering. And then we have a series of next steps for communities. I'm not really going to go through these in a ton of detail because we're currently working on this and this will be thoroughly revised soon. But we have started to implement these next steps, working with several climate receiver places on the first pilot projects. This includes, we're partnering with both Flint, Michigan, and Rochester, Minnesota to move this project forward. And we have other projects in the work as well, such as Tallahassee, Oklahoma, which is a small rural, historically Black town in eastern Oklahoma. And we're in conversations with other communities as well to move forward these next steps. And our next steps include funding the project, expanding our volunteer base and outreach, building integrated documents and resources, and working with communities. And in terms of building integrated documents and resources, here's an example that I can use from the principles section of the Community Principles Guide. Under efficient use of land resources, one of the subpoints is uses of land, and we break that down into population centers and commercial activity, farmland and resource extraction, infrastructure and transportation, and natural lands. And essentially, as we're building the community metrics guide, we want specific metrics as well as qualitative points of assessment for each of these subpoints of looking at land use to help the community understand their current conditions and understand where they need the most improvement. And then we also want to link these same categories of land use directly to points within the Receiver Places Toolkit, the database of case studies, policy recommendations, and other resources that we're building out. And we want all of these different documents to link together very seamlessly so communities can go straight from assessing where they need improvement to understanding where that fits within the Community Principles Guide, to understanding what are some resources and policy recommendations that they can jump to from there that can help them solve this issue if they don't have ideas already, or if they want to expand their city's toolkit of ideas. And we want to do the same process for the variety of other principles, points, subpoints, etc. of the Community Principles Guide. So that pretty much sums up what we're doing right now with the Climate Receiver Places project. You can visit us here at this website or through this QR code here. And thanks everyone for listening in, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Baxter. Let's go into Q&A session. Who's ready with a question? Desiree.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Baxter. It was great listening to you. So, I have this question. How are you reading in order to understand the particularities of each community? Like, because you mentioned that each community have different backgrounds, so they must be approached differently. So how are you reading them? As a lack of a better word.
Right. So some of the different things we're looking at, different communities. First of all, in terms of how it applies to climate change, certain communities have different situations with climate change. Some communities have certain climate risk factors that others really don't. And even though we tried to focus on communities that have low climate risk, every community has some climate risk. So some places might have to focus on flash flooding. Some places might have to focus on extreme heat. Others might have to focus on water scarcity. And that's one piece of it. Another piece is local culture. We want to celebrate the uniqueness of every community and really embrace that. So every community shouldn't be implementing the exact same solutions due to different cultures. And additionally, another reason we want different communities to be approached differently is that some of the communities on our list are large, some are small. Different places have different types of economies. Some places are very urban, some are only urban in a very small area, and much of the rest is sprawling. Some places are growing, some are stagnant, some are declining in population. Some have abundant social and economic issues and lots of poverty and struggle, and some, others have those same issues but to a much less extent. So these and other factors really have to be considered when avoiding a one-size-fits-all approach to how communities should implement.
Thanks.
I guess thanks for the presentation, Baxter. Really good. I really appreciate your the hope and optimism in this climate. It's really a necessary thing. And yeah, one of the things you talked about was, with migrants coming in, with places there, ensuring opportunity for the people who are already there, ensuring that they're not uprooted. And I just wondered if you could speak a little bit more to some of the strategies and things for that, because that is often the hard thing, to ensure that, as a local economy grows, it actually benefits everybody and not just a few.
Right. So there's certain solutions I'm aware of. This project is looking a lot at sort of the larger scale issues. And since I'm not really the greatest expert on that, the specifics of that policy, as we start to get more in depth with working with these communities, I want to bring in outside experts to make sure we get the best recommendations and ideas, and hear from residents as well. But some of the concerns that I have and ideas I have personally, in terms of places that have been stagnant and declining for a long time and are expected to see in-migration due to climate change, one of the best things these communities can do now is set aside land for affordable housing and affordable commercial space before the value of the land jumps due to income and climate migration, so that the resource is there when the communities need it. Also, as I sort of alluded to there, I think affordable commercial space is just as important as affordable housing. It's sometimes overlooked, but if residents are not displaced from their communities, they need to be able to have businesses that they can actually afford to shop at and interact with within their neighborhoods. And they need opportunities to start their own businesses with limited financing options. So that's important as well. And then zoning really plays a big piece here. A lot of the cities we look at, not all of them, but many of them have extremely restrictive zoning that much of the city and region only allows for single family homes, and that really pushes people out to the edges and doesn't allow for as much housing to be built where it's needed. So that's incredibly important as well, to allow more dense walkable mixed use zoning, maybe even provide bonuses in how much you can build for incorporating affordable housing. And there's a variety of other solutions as well, but it's not, there's no easy solution there. It's going to be really tough as you know, half of the world moves to try to live in the other half of the world that's already occupied.
Thank you. Really nice. Good answer.
Okay, Punit Gandhi had a question. He's not present at the meeting, but he wrote a question to be asked to you, Baxter. So Punit is part of the Global Walkability Correspondence Network as well. And he also is involved in a network of climate practitioners in India. So I think they're all going to be really curious about your work. There's two parts to his question. The first one is, how can countries/cities in the developing world or global south replicate the study? Let's start with that.
Right. So I think this project is similar in how it could be put together in a variety of different places. I think it's important everywhere, not just in the US. I think one of the first things you can do is identify a series of metrics that you can assess local communities on how at risk are they from climate change, and you can identify where are the safe havens. And the benefit of starting with that, I found, is that it really creates a good tool for pushing those communities to adopt changes that they should have adopted long ago. And now there's an urgent reason for them to do it, because you're specifically calling them out as one of the target places that needs to make this change. So that can kind of speed up the process. And the fact that we started with that first step here of doing the mapping of various places that are lower climate risk is the entire reason why the first two cities we're working with, Rochester, Minnesota, and Flint, Michigan, have decided to partner with us. They see this as framed really well to be a good opportunity to push their communities forward. Next, I think the largest issues that should be addressed first, water scarcity, heat, and equity, making sure that water and safety from high temperatures and opportunity and housing and everything is provided equally across the economic and social spectrum. And I think in addition to those things, unfortunately, a lot of the global south is at higher risk of worse impacts from climate change. And I think there's other work that needs to be done on the side of communities that ultimately are going to have a lot of outmigration to safer places. I think that requires a lot of international cooperation. I think that requires careful planning on the part of those places, so that as they lose population, that the remaining residents continue to have access to the services they need. There's some places in the United States that need a lot of planning like that. That includes cities like Miami and New Orleans. and many others, but the percentage of places that are going to have high levels of out-migration is much greater in the global south. So we're at Place Initiative, we're not working on sending places as much as receiver places at the moment, but we encourage others to, and we'd love to be part of that conversation.
Okay, so I think you might have already answered some of his part two, but I'll ask it. So part two of Punit's question is, a country like India has more than 80% of its districts that are susceptible to one or more vulnerabilities. How can such a country develop such analysis and solutions for such challenges?
Yeah, I think focusing on how can those 20% of places that are lower risk, how can they receive people without without damaging their own access to resources and viability, and then for the people that you can't fit into those 20% of places, how do you work internationally and locally to manage population decline in a way that gives people an opportunity somewhere to leave to, and gives people still remaining there, at least for a little while, access to the resources they need in the meantime. And I think focusing on carefully managed decline and pouring a lot of resources into adapting potential climate receiver places is in the long run going to yield better results, unfortunately, than looking at some of the places that are higher risk and trying to build really over-the-top expensive solutions to protect the places when these defenses probably are going to fail. And you know, in terms of heat and loss of water resources, there's only, in certain situations, there's only so much you can do in terms of planning for it before, you know, there's no resources left, and there's not really anything more you can do to solve the problem. And then in other places, in terms of sea level rise, it becomes a lot more apparent. There's only so high you're going to build a seawall, so much you're going to protect before it becomes ridiculous. And then in terms of expense, when it would be sort of much more beneficial to the people and much more cost effective to plan for relocation. And it's a difficult conversation because these 80% of communities in India, and as mentioned in the question, as well as a lot of other similar places across the world, they're people's homes, they're existing communities, they mean a lot to people. There's people who are living there, there's complex social and economic dynamics, but ultimately some places will have to be left behind. And unless we can really fix climate change on a global scale.
Right, I understand. Okay, also, I have a question, and that relates to, when I learned about your work, I thought it was very cutting edge, extraordinarily relevant, also really interesting. And I think when we spoke last, I asked you, started asking about receiver places on a more global scale. Your work right now is focused on North America. I guess it'll be really interesting to see if Place Initiative goes global. I think there would be so much interest for that. So, and you mentioned that, in fact, part of the reason why this work exists is because when you were looking into it, you were finding a lot of people were talking about it, but not working on it. So what are your thoughts about the work that is being done, that needs to be done. That's the work that's coming, I think, as people see what you're doing and are curious to replicate in their own societies.
Yeah, so it's incredibly important for this work to be done around the world, and also for the work of sending places as well as the receiver places to be done around the world. And this is a matter of will communities remain resilient enough to provide a positive environment for their residents and continue to thrive and continue to exist even. And then on the other hand, will people have somewhere to go, and will existing residents have somewhere to stay? And if this is not done, there will be a lot of suffering. And if it is done at a large scale across the world, and not just in the US, I could envision it, doubling the amount of people that have somewhere safe to go, and that's a really big deal. Now, I think it's very it makes a lot of sense for us to start in the US where we are, particularly because a lot of the resilience places in a world of climate change are clustered around the Great Lakes, which has quite a significant amount of fresh water, and not everywhere in the world has that. Certainly nowhere else has as much, except for maybe Lake Baikal. But this project is just as relevant to other places around the world. Climate change is going to throw a lot of disasters and risks and precarious situations in a lot of communities. And if communities are not able to position themselves to be more resilient, then they could face disaster, financial collapse in terms of city finances and their economies, and loss of crucial systems for residents, and not enough affordable housing, and so many different factors that make this very important work across the world. And the US isn't the only place that is well positioned to receive climate migrants. Many other regions across the world, particularly, it's hard to say exactly because I haven't done the analysis, but much of Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, I think, and it is well positioned, and unfortunately much of the global South has higher climate risks, but still there's pockets of well-positioned geography in every corner of the world that really should be focused on with this type of work. And if others want to begin this type of work outside of the US, we'd be happy to work together with you and learn a lot in the process.
Speaking of Eastern Europe, I would be curious in the future, maybe it's too soon to tell, if a situation like this past couple of months in Poland, for example, receiving so many people from the Ukraine and the mobilization of support, if that could also provide a model for reception of climate migrants too, in terms of organizing resources and literally just logistics, people, millions of incoming people, if situations like that, so not related to climate change, related to war, but can also be used as a model for intake.
Yeah, absolutely. We were actually in our bi-weekly project meeting last night. We were actually discussing Poland and how it has received so many people so quickly, and how that can be used as an example for how other places may be able to receive people. And the reason I specify Eastern Europe, and there's other areas as well, there's a data source that's from the New York Times that uses some of the same data as what we're looking for in the US, is looking at what are the various climate risks across the world, and which places are well situated for the future. So, we're primarily looking at this region here and a bit of this in the US. But in Europe, you see a lot of Northeastern Europe here has relatively low risk. And there's pockets in other parts of the world as well that have lower risk too. But yeah, we really need to be strengthening those places and accepting people from other places.
Okay, do we have some more questions? And I got a question here from somebody about where this will be shared. This will be on YouTube, so we will all be able to watch it later and share with our communities. But do we have more questions?
One thing I might actually want to add on the Poland situation of receiving Ukrainian refugees is that this sort of thing will become a lot more common in coming years, likely and unfortunately, as climate change continues to destabilize various regions of the world, leading to more conflicts and leading to more refugees. And it may not always immediately and obviously seem like it's climate migration, but much of it truly is, because there's many places that likely could more easily avoid the conflict if they had that little extra bit of stability, if there wasn't a major drought, if there weren't heat waves, if there wasn't massive flooding that was destroying towns and cities, if there weren't worsened hurricanes and other storms. So that's important to consider, that as we see refugee numbers rise, that many of those may be actually climate migrants as well.
Yeah, exactly. And as I'm here in Poland, I actually hope to follow up with you. I'll be putting my ear to the ground for this. I would love to see a kind of guide developed about what was done here with input from municipalities across Poland, because the mobilization was so completely, it was very quick, and it seemed very organized, and it was just systems wide. Everybody shifted to mobilizing for it. It was extreme. I mean, I'm sure there were pockets of it being not so organized, but it was a rather impressive organized show of solidarity and just logistical support. Municipalities just rolled out like that to provide services. So maybe it will be really interesting from places like Poland and other places that have dealt with crisis recently or historically to learn about how they so rapidly took in people as well.
I would love to see more about that and learn from that example as well. I'm fairly confident that if the same situation happened to the United States today, and if this country had to receive refugees so quickly and at such a large scale, that it would completely fail and be very disorganized. We have a lot to do, a lot of work to do here on readiness for such things, and so does most of the rest of the world.
Okay, so I'm adding this to my to-do list, is to find out who in Poland I can organize this readiness manual with and have it translated to, so it's not just in Polish, but for the international community. Do we have more questions? As we're waiting, I want to share a quote from our first talk, Baxter, in which you said, "There is no solution to climate change without looking at walkable, transit-oriented, compact urbanism." I think that's such a great quote. And of course, we're here as a pedestrian space roundtable. Everybody here is part of this walkability network. So I wonder if you have any thoughts you can share for all the practitioners, academics, students, professionals in this network who are working on these themes.
Absolutely. I touched a bit on that in my presentation, but to reiterate, there's no solution to climate change without walkable, transit-oriented, compact urbanism, because in terms of protecting the environment and focusing on sustainability and reducing climate change, we have to reduce emissions and our impact on the landscape. And that means building more compact, not spreading out into a larger land area. That means lower transportation emissions by using more walking, biking, and transit as opposed to cars and more miles of vehicles traveled. It means building less infrastructure per capita, which also emits carbon and uses a lot of resources and can cause environmental destruction in the process of making such materials, such as more compact places require less miles of roads, less miles of pipes and wires, less electricity lost in the wires over a shorter distance of wires in more compact places. And then in addition to that, on the other side of things, communities cannot serve their residents well in adapting to climate change without being compact, walkable, transit-oriented, et cetera. And this is due to a wide variety of reasons, such as resilience and municipal financial benefits of being more compact and resource efficient, allow for better social programs, allow for better adaptation, really more money to put aside to spend on things other than trying to patch potholes in a very large number of miles per capita road system. And then additionally, due to supply chain issues and constraints on resources that will come in a world of climate change and instability, such that communities may no longer have access to be able to rely on fossil fuels for transportation, and they need to be able to switch to walking and biking and other less resource intensive means of transportation to give their people really access to still moving around their community and getting to where they need to be in a resource and income constrained world. So it's important both for the impact on the environment and the impact on the people in a stressed environment.
Okay, this is maybe a funny question, but out of curiosity, how do you or your team maintain hope and optimism with with these issues, which are sort of just it's just a lot, as we all know, to process?
Well, sometimes it's difficult, and certainly maybe today's presentation wasn't the most hopeful and optimistic I've ever sounded in terms of this. I've ever sounded in terms of this project, but we remain hope and optimism. We retain hope and optimism because of the massive potential that this project has to transform communities that need to be transformed. We're working with Flint, Michigan, for example, which has seen a lot of disasters in terms of their water supply, and has seen a lot of social and economic decline and out-migration for a long time. And with Flint, we're seeing the opportunity to both reverse the trend for their city as well as plan for a future where they can continue to and improve upon being a more a vibrant and successful community, and also using this project as an opportunity to give people somewhere to go in a world of climate change, because we know that at this point, at least some level of climate change, some catastrophic level of climate change is sort of baked in already, and hopefully we can avoid an even worse situation. But within that situation, we can remain hopeful because we can work to provide opportunity for example, someone who is displaced from somewhere with sea level rise, heat, crop failures, and so many other climate risks, to a place where they can continue to thrive in the future, themselves and the generations after them. And providing this opportunity for as many people as possible is what leaves us hopeful. The other aspect of this that leaves us hopeful is by using this situation as a way to frame the urgency of implementing better walkable transit-oriented urbanism in communities. Those communities we're now seeing are more willing to take the steps they need to take to implement this change faster than they were previously doing. So through this project, we're hopeful because communities are going to change that may not have changed otherwise for the better. So there's a lot to be worried by. There's a lot to not feel hopeful about, but this project, we're really trying to create as much hope as we can.
Yeah, I was just curious what your answer would be. I mean, your work is solutionary, so in that it's sort of innately optimistic because it's providing solutions instead of just pointing out problems, while also addressing the loss and stress that climate change is bringing, not going to bring. It's happening already. I'm curious to hear, actually more, Flint surprised me, Flint, Michigan, as the first receiver place. I just need to get more familiar with your variables. So just knowing the challenges that Flint has faced. So it's kind of interesting. It's like a twist, the places that have been identified. So I'd be curious to hear more. Does that mean also surrounding area around Flint is generally like a good receiver region?
Right. So when we're looking at the receiver place itself, we're looking at Flint, Michigan itself. We see as a good receiver place. Now, Flint has faced a lot of problems in the past. It's gotten some really bad press, but it also has some great people in the city and community, and lots of charitable and nonprofit organizations working to make positive change. And we are through this project trying to coordinate and direct that change into a way that can really create a great future for them in a world of climate change. And we see it as a receiver place because it's a city that, at least in terms of American cities, is somewhat compact and walkable, and it faces fairly low climate risks. Michigan, the state of Michigan as a whole, has fairly low climate risk. So Flint won't be facing the same heat that the American Southwest is facing. It won't be facing the sea level rise of Miami. It won't be facing the hurricanes of New Orleans, or the extreme flooding and rainfall of certain river valleys in Appalachia. It won't be facing the wildfires of the West and of the western part of the U.S. And it really has plentiful access to water due to the Great Lakes. It gets its water from Lake Michigan, I believe, and I think it's Lake Michigan. and it has a colder climate to start out with than many other places. So as temperatures warm globally, it won't be unbearably hot. And there's really a lot of factors that come together to make its geography well situated for receiving climate migrants. In terms of its social and economic situation, it certainly has a long way to go, but we want to start preparing it so that socially and economically, and in terms of land use policy and other factors, that it can be in the right place once the migration ramps up in larger numbers. That being said, it's not perfect because of its decline. And well, I mean, its decline helps it a bit in certain ways in terms of being a climate receiver place, because there's a lot of underutilized and vacant parcels within the city, within a walkable street grid, that are, once the demand for development happens, are prime for densification and places for people to go. But its social and economic problems, its municipal finance problems, its water problems cause a lot of issues, but no place is without issues. There are other communities that may be more ready today to receive people than Flint is, but Flint is certainly in a much better position in the long run than most places.
Right, that's really interesting. And then the work you do with communities is not only identifying their potential, their existing or potential resilience, but also strengthening it. So that's the work of Place Initiative also, correct?
Exactly, yes. And currently we're building coalitions in the first two places we're working with, Flint, Michigan, and Rochester, Minnesota, of coalitions of people and groups within the cities that are currently working on a lot of more specific issues that fall within our projects, and also collecting a variety of data sources and information from people to help assess the community's current condition. And we're gathering these resources, gathering these coalitions of people to help take these separate initiatives going on, bring them together, find the overlap where they can be even more productive if they work together, and find where the missing pieces and gaps between the various initiatives going on already in places like Flint, and where can we help their city identify the missing pieces, as well as eventually making sure that they can collaborate with their whole region to avoid further sprawl into the very productive Michigan farmland.
Okay, I've gotten a direct message with a question from one of the participants who says their sound is poor, and also they had some Wi-Fi issues. So they missed, I think, when you shared earlier your answers on for the gentleman in India. Mohammed is in Isfahan, Iran, and his question is how to implement these findings in our cities. So very similar to the earlier question. I think this is going to, you're going to get this question for years. I think, how do we implement these findings in our cities? So I know you don't need to repeat yourself. We have this recording, but
I'll add a bit to it.
Yeah.
So first identify the places in your region that are safer from climate change, and help those communities implement principles of quality urbanism and resilience by showing them the urgency of implementing those things, because they're going to need to receive people. On the other end of things, communities that have higher climate risk, preparing those places and creating a managed decline and retreat that still provides necessary resources and services to residents who are not the first to leave. In addition to that, even if your place is not a climate receiver place, the principles of this project will improve any place's resilience. So it might give, your place may not be ultimately a climate receiver place that is able to as successfully as some of these other places long into the future, but it can give your community a bit of an extra run and more stability and more resilience, at least in the near term. So these principles are worth implementing anywhere. It's just that we are within our project focusing on climate receiver places. But that being said, almost every corner of the world has some places that are going to be safer from climate change, not perfectly safe, but a better option than the places around them. And those places should be strengthened and made more resilient and made more welcoming to climate refugees in order to give people a place to go and protect the places intrinsically. So that goes for the United States, that goes for India, that goes for Iran, that goes for anywhere.
Okay, we're coming towards the end. Do we have any more questions? We'll let the group think about it. If anybody has questions, please feel free to raise your hand so I see it and we can bring you in. But one question I did want to ask before we close out, I saw you mentioned in your presentation also about volunteers. So if people want to get involved in your project, I think there's coalition building you're doing, but also volunteering, or how can people get involved, contact you, etc.
Right. So to get involved, you can, I'm going to share my screen again so you can see how to do this. You can go to our website, placeinitiative.org, and to get involved, you can go to projects, Climate Receiver Places Project, and down here you can click the button that says join the project. That will bring you to a Google form and you can fill this out and we will add you to our mailing list, and from there you should get emails about future meetings, and we'd really love to grow our base of volunteers and partner with those that are interested in partnering to expand the capacity of the project and the geography of the project.
Okay, fantastic. Does anybody have any final questions? If not, we are going to say thank you very much for your time for this really insightful presentation. I hope to host you in the future more and learn about how your project's developing and see how we can cooperate. And this has been really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Really nice, really great presentation. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, great. So we are going to say thank you for today, Baxter, and looking forward to next time. Thank you, everybody, also for attending.
Thank you. Bye-bye.